Absolute breaking news. In just a few days, the purchase plan is supposed to be published here for the USA, detailing how they will buy Bitcoin for their strategic Bitcoin reserve, when, and how much. This all comes from a press release, and in just a few days, it's supposed to be published here by, well, the US administration. Additionally, Donald Trump is announcing new tariffs, and all of this is currently causing a lot of volatility in the market. That means we have the bullish side. But we also have the volatility that's now being triggered in the market by Trump. We have hedge funds now recommending a Bitcoin allocation of up to 10%. CZ, the founder of Binance, explains how you can get rich now with Bitcoin and crypto, and what you need to avoid to actually become rich. And Kevin O'Reilly is making ultra-bullish statements. Now is really the time to take a close look at what's happening in the current market. But first, smash the like button below for new all-time highs, for higher Bitcoin prices, so Bitcoin can really take off here. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the like button for me down below. But first, let's take a look at the news here. We can now see that exchanges have even lower reserves. That means we've been seeing this trend for several years now, but right now there are even fewer Bitcoins on the exchanges. And this is a chart from CoinGlass. You can clearly see on the green line how the amount of Bitcoin on exchanges keeps going down, while on the other hand, the Bitcoin price tends to keep going up. I mean, it's really not that far off from an all-time high now. Of course, there's still a little bit missing, but it's not that much that's missing. And we'll get to Donald Trump and so on in a moment. But first, we need to go through a few things here that are really relevant right now. Here we have the next big purchases. We have the public trading company Genius Group, which has now announced that they are buying Bitcoin for $1.1 billion. Absolutely wild. We had the company from Anthony Pompliano who bought Bitcoin for $1 billion here. Now we have the next big company buying for $1.1 billion here. I don't know if this is their initial investment. If it is, then this would be the largest initial investment because before it was $1 billion. But I'm not sure if they've already bought Bitcoin before. You can let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, it would just be a massive purchase. Michael Saylor is also buying Bitcoin in the billions these days. And what's extremely relevant here is that we now have hedge funds, like the $40 billion hedge fund Calamus, which is now simply recommending people to have a 10% Bitcoin allocation. So not just up to, but actually a 10% Bitcoin allocation to replace equities in gold. That means you have a lower allocation to stocks and a lower allocation to gold, and in return, the Bitcoin allocation goes up. And they also say here, Bitcoin matured into a global store of value. So Bitcoin is a global store of value here. And what you can simply take away from this is that Bitcoin will definitely draw capital out of the stock market and the gold market. There are relatively few people who diversify out of Bitcoin into gold or out of Bitcoin into stocks, but there are a great many who allocate from stocks into Bitcoin, from gold into Bitcoin, and of course also from real estate into Bitcoin, from bonds into Bitcoin, from cash into Bitcoin, from various financial instruments into Bitcoin. And you have to realize this 10% allocation is being made by a hedge fund, not just some random guy or something. A hedge fund 10% allocation means that if the whole world were to switch to a 10% allocation here, or let's just say only the major financial centers, the big players, the US financial sector, the European financial sector, and so on, it doesn't even have to be the whole world. It's enough if, say, about a quarter of the world has a 10% Bitcoin allocation, then we're already well into the seven-figure range, easily surpassing the million mark. Even if we only have small allocations, like 2 or 3% of the entire world population or something, but 10% is just a whole different level. It's really crazy what's happening here. And then we have Kevin O'Reilly, who's been bullish from time to time in the past, saying here, we're still so incredibly early. The Shark Tank legend says that if sovereign wealth funds invest 1% in Bitcoin, we'll see a whole new price level. And that's the thing, he's talking about just 1% here, even if we just assume that. That means before, we were talking about a 10% allocation in general for everyone, but even if just 1% of global sovereign wealth flows into Bitcoin, I mean, that's seriously next level, and it won't just stop at 1%. Let me know in the comments, how many of you started out with a really small allocation? Whether it's 1%, 0.5%, 3%, 10%, the allocation just keeps getting higher. And it's also important not to allocate too much to Bitcoin at the beginning, because you first need to learn how it all works. How does self-custody work? What is Bitcoin? How can I secure it properly? How can I generate my own keys? I always say, get yourself a TREZOR hardware wallet. I'll put a link for the customers again to a TREZOR hardware wallet. You can use the code BitcoinHotel. You'll get a discount here, 10% off when you buy a hardware wallet, because it's really important to understand this. First, understand here what you're doing, what you're buying, and then you can also increase your allocation, because otherwise you'll have the problem of panic selling, making wrong keys, making mistakes with the wallet, and many other issues. And that's why Kevin O'Reilly says, hey, we're incredibly early, but a 1% Bitcoin allocation could definitely take Bitcoin to a new level. And if he's already talking about a 1% Bitcoin allocation, then you could assume that it's generally possible. In my opinion, it's not just possible, but honestly, it's a no-brainer, and I even think it's stupid not to allocate at least 1% into Bitcoin. Of course, none of this is investment advice. You do whatever you want with your money. I have no idea anyway. I'm just some dude or whatever who put on a beanie because it's way too cold for me here, and I already miss El Salvador. Here in Germany, you freeze your ass off even though it's supposed to be summer, at least right now. That's why I'm already looking forward to leaving again soon. I always thought I wouldn't need beanies anymore, or shorts and stuff. I don't even have any shorts. That's the problem. Now it's getting cold. Now I don't have any shorts. That's why sooner or later, I'll have to make my exit from here again. But Kevin O'Reilly is bullish here, and now let's take a look at what's going on with Donald Trump, because that's just totally wild. Especially the announcement that's coming now regarding Bitcoin, whether the plans for Bitcoin purchases will be leaked or published in the next few days. But before that, we have to take a quick look, because Donald Trump has once again triggered massive volatility here. There was now a report from the Kobayashi letter. You couldn't make this stuff up. President Trump is now sending individual trade letters to countries with new tariff rates. So far, Trump has announced tariffs of 25% on Japan and 25% on South Korea. Trump also announced that he would raise tariffs on Japan if the country increased tariffs on the US as a retaliatory measure. Meanwhile, yes, the losses of the S&P 500 are accelerating here, now down 1% on the day. Has the second part of Liberation Day just begun here? So are we really seeing the second Liberation Day here? And the finance minister also says, hey, over 100 countries did not respond to the US tariffs with trade agreements, so they did not react with trade agreements. All of these countries are expected to receive tariff notices. We will break it down in real time. And that's exactly what's been driving the markets for weeks and months now. Or maybe not months, but definitely weeks. The whole tariff story, the Liberation Day, which was celebrated so grandly. And now people are already talking about a second Liberation Day that has also taken place here. And now it has actually come out that the White House is also saying that 12 more countries will receive trade letters. So far, Japan and South Korea have received trade letters with tariffs of 25% starting August 1st. And apparently, just now, the breaking news is that 12 more countries have received their trade letters. Maybe, by the time you watch this video, a few more trade letters will have been sent out, and it's honestly a really wild story. It just goes back and forth and back and forth. Sometimes the tariffs are lowered, then they're back again, then they're suspended, then they're reinstated, then there are more negotiations, and then this happens, and that happens, and whatever else. And yeah, I also discussed this with a lot of people over the weekend, and we always came to the same conclusion. Tariffs are, in the long run, always a hindrance for both parties, for the US, but also for the other parties involved. It's basically always a lose-lose situation, and at best, it can only be a very, very short-term solution, if at all. And free trade is always the way to go here. Free trade is always what you should aim for here. But now we also have this situation here. Specifically, we've had a press release here, and it says that the Trump administration will publish a report about Bitcoin and crypto about the policy. And the whole thing is supposed to be released on July 22nd. It's supposed to be called the Crypto in America report. And now, very, very important, it is supposed to include, how do you say it in German? Recommendations, or better yet, suggestions or recommendations on how to fund the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So basically how to finance the whole thing. And it also says here, may include recommendations on funding a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It also goes into what is repeatedly mentioned here, including by Bo Haynes, that of course taxpayers should not be tapped for this, that the whole thing should happen in a tax-neutral way. And as I've speculated a lot in the past, for example, you could use customs revenues, or you could use Bitcoin mining. Bo Haynes even said in the interview that you can absolutely use Bitcoin mining, the proceeds from Bitcoin mining. Of course, you can use certain reserves, you can swap reserves, for example, convert shitcoin reserves into Bitcoin. Or, for example, you could sell gold. That's what Cynthia Lummis recommended. You could sell gold, and then there's something like a reserve currency fund or something like that. I can't remember the exact name right now, but you could definitely use certain, certain backings to finance it. And I once presented a list like that. There were 10 points at one time. I can't remember them all now, but in any case, there have already been a lot of considerations, and it's pretty crazy. Some reports even say, hey, maybe Senator Cynthia Lummis's plan to buy 1 million Bitcoin will be announced here on July 22nd. And that would be an even crazier story. We also know that Donald Trump is a supporter of this bill, Cynthia Lummis's bill to buy 1 million Bitcoin. There are a lot of supporters. I don't know if there are any opponents or anything like that. And that's what Bahhians has always said. First, they want to pass the Genius Bill, then the market structure, and then they want to focus on Bitcoin. Okay, you could say we're not at that level yet, but apparently this is actually being published now, and we've kept hearing, okay, why is this taking so long? Why is it taking so long? And the reason was simply that the priorities were still elsewhere. The priorities were just with the Genius Act, with market structure, and so on. But now they've made more progress there, and it could look good that here. I need to check how many days are left. Yeah, there are still a few days left. So it's now the 8th of July when this goes online, and until the 22nd, that's just under 2 weeks. So there's still a bit of time until then, but 2 weeks isn't that far off either. And then we can be really, really curious to see what comes out of it. And then there was also an understatement from CZ, the Binance founder, who is no longer at Binance as the founder, or, well, he's still the founder, as they say, but he's no longer the CEO. And now he's giving a very, very important tip here on how you can get rich quickly. He says here, if you want to get rich quickly, keep your hands off cryptocurrencies and blame them, and blame them or something like that. So don't touch crypto and blame crypto. So I'm not exactly sure what he means by blame here, but in any case, the point is that you shouldn't touch cryptocurrencies. That's also something I always tell you, focus on Bitcoin. If you want, once you're done, if you want to mess around a bit, then think about whether you want to gamble with 10%, 5%, 2% on some other stuff. But by now, a lot of people have realized, okay, maybe this time it won't be such a crazy altcoin cycle. This time, people are more likely to go not into shitcoins, but into the treasury companies. The advantage is that the capital then stays within the Bitcoin economy or the Bitcoin world. Otherwise, the capital has always flowed out during the bull run, and then in the bear market and so on, it slowly flowed back in until most of the time it was back with us in the Bitcoin space. And then there were always those 2, 3 for months when the altcoins massively outperformed. I would definitely recommend, generally keep your hands off them, but of course, none of this is financial advice. Like I said, I'm just some guy who got too cold here in Germany, and that's why I'm wearing a beanie. What do I really know? But history has simply proven it. In the long run, Bitcoin has outperformed almost all shitcoins. There have only ever been very, very short periods when the altcoins perform better, and that's very unlikely to change in the future. So just be careful, folks, with what you do, and CZ says it too, plain and simple. And CZ himself isn't really known as a Bitcoin maximalist, but rather as someone who actually comes from the crypto world. That's why he's already issuing these kinds of warnings here. And so, if you want to buy Bitcoin, check it out. I'll put a link in for you to 21 Bitcoin. Here you can buy Bitcoin easily, securely, and simply. With the code Bitcoin, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. It's an absolute recommendation. I also always make a point to explicitly recommend only Bitcoin-only companies because I just have a Bitcoin-only approach here and I don't want people to end up getting into any shitcoins or anything like that, which you often see on other YouTube channels. People just let their followers run into shitcoins, monetize their audience, and that's obviously a really nasty business. I mean, I don't want to accuse anyone of anything. Of course, everyone can do as they please, but I just think it's really, really bad to exploit your reach to let people run into shitcoin projects. Believe me, I get so many requests from all kinds of shitcoin projects, whether it's NFTs, altcoins, and so on. I mean, I could make a fortune from that, but then your reputation is ruined, your karma is messed up, you can't look at yourself in the mirror anymore. And in the end, that doesn't help anyone, not me, not you. So, for me, Bitcoin only. And if you want to mess around, then only with small allocations. See you. Peace out.